Hey y'all, how's it going?
Hey,
The early joiners love it. Kind of people. How's
we
everyone?
listen to the rules.
Good. I'm glad. I know, I'm sure everyone will be good here. Still good on time. How's your day going so far?
All right. A little busier than I like, but
Yeah.
I had the flu for the past several days, so at least I'm
Oh,
over that. Yeah,
I am so sorry. Thank you for being here.
no worries.
In spite of that, I'm right there with you. I'm pretty sure I have a respiratory bug.
Oh, yeah.
Um, because I've been coughing nonstop for like 2 weeks after having really bad cold as well. So, hey everyone.
Hey. Hi.
It was so cool to see so many faces on the same screen. And some of you, I don't think I've even ever had the opportunity to be on a video call with before. So that's really cool. Hey Jane, hey Robin.
Hello.
I feel like a classroom teacher. I'm like taking roll call, coming and checking you off.
Present.
Right. Hey Haru. I'll just give a few more minutes for people to sign on, and then we'll dig right into just a review of the agenda and some info items. And in the meantime, I'm also going to check where our numbers landed last time. I checked. I was pretty pleasantly surprised with our numbers for this. I was telling Dev the other day, I was like, wow, this is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, we're at 517, which is a good number.
Excellent.
Yeah, comparable to like some of our, other even just like topic focused events.
Donors?
Yeah, they're all donors. It's a private donor event, so it was only sent out to donors.
What was the cover?
Sorry?
Sorry, bad joke. I was asking what the cover charge was.
Yeah, it means that we'll probably see about 200 people join, just because that's what normal attrition generally looks like. But it's a good number to start with, and that accounts for all the people that'll watch after the fact because they couldn't make it today or other issues come up. But also just apologies in advance. I just said at the beginning of the call, I'm like 90% sure I have a respiratory infection. So I'm gonna be coughing a lot. So I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna get it checked out tomorrow. It's not COVID, I checked. Hey Prilla, welcome, welcome. Once we have everyone on, I'll run through our agenda just one more time. Just let you all know what to expect. And I am actually writing everyone's names down to check you off. That was not just a joke. All right, so we have Jane and Jeanette, Heather, Jody, Kathleen, Neil, Carla. We're just missing our star moderator.
He's here in Austin today, and I think he should be around.
God, I would hope so. No, Steve will definitely be here. Steve never lets us down. Send him a quick note. Is there anyone here who has never done like a Zoom event in terms of like actual participation on a panel or some sort? So not an attendee, because I feel like we've all done that at this point. Jane, really? I'm surprised. That surprises me for some reason.
I'm not technically a panelist though.
Yeah, but you have a speaker role, so I mark you down as a panelist. Listen, when we take our metrics at the end of the day, your number goes down as a panelist, so that's what I'm counting you as.
Sounds good to me.
And everyone else is pretty used to the annoyance of Zoom. Still here and here to stay, I think. No worries for that. Yeah, if anyone needs to just like step away for a quick second and grab a glass of water, whatever else, feel free to. And then for the people who are on, if you're able to, and you can just shoot me a message if you're not entirely sure how to do it, but if you could put your title in addition to your name, just because we have some non-reporters here, just so you're easier to identify for folks. Jane, I'll go ahead and add yours in since it's your first time on the call. But if you want to just put like reporter on your name, that would be helpful. Let me add that. Oh, you got it, Jane. I didn't even have a chance to get to it. Thank you.
I've used Zoom a couple times, you know.
Yeah, I'm forgetting that's also an option. You can change your name there. I'm never an attendee anymore for Zoom, so.
Jane, the big question is, how'd you get the company to be quiet for the next hour?
My husband has him outside.
Okay, that's good.
Hey, Steve, welcome.
All right, I'm trying to print something out here, so I'm gonna mute.
Yeah, I took my dog for a walk literally right before this because I already knew to expect.
Yeah, they don't really care.
Really don't. He's literally lying down right next to my rolling chair.
Aw, he's being your support dog.
Yeah, that's true.
Rosia, is there a world in which I don't need to repeat that intro twice, or for sure I should count on repeating myself twice? Just curious.
Repeat it just because actually I think the way that we have it written, you actually might not. Let me double check that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're good because we have that break. So I'm just gonna do that. The whole purpose of repeating it is just to give, the session a few more minutes for people to sign on, but it's already
okay.
And then you tacked on like an official beginning. So you're good to go. You don't need to repeat that.
Okay.
All right. Steve, if you're okay, I'm gonna start just reviewing the agenda and letting people know what to expect.
Sure, I'm still in a printing mode, but go right ahead.
Awesome. All right, so nothing's changed, from the initial email that I sent you all of the run of show. We'll be starting exactly at 4 p.m. Eastern. There's going to be some opening remarks by Jane, super brief, and then Jane will be introducing Robin. And then Robin will share some brief remarks as well. And then Robin will pass it over to Steve. So Steve is gonna, have the chunk of it. Steve is gonna be the one that's gonna be in conversation with you all. And then I have your slides as well. So I'm gonna throw those, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, sorry.
No, you're good. I'll throw those slides up just
No.
as soon as we start with Jody, and we'll just have those up. So feel free to like loosely reference them as you're going through your conversation with Steve. And then just for the purpose of having it here for you all, I'm gonna drop the order that conversation right here. And so that's gonna be the order of just that section of talking to the reporters. We want to remember, we're trying to keep it brief, right? We do want to, really focus in on the impact of each story, and that's going to be the aim. But when I say brief, I'm thinking like 6 to 7 minutes per story, right? And the purpose of that was really kind of just to come across or share all of these stories in very digestible chunks for each of our donors, and to really drive home, the point that, we're having impact here, and these are the very real ways that that's happening. I'll be sharing, the links to each of the stories as you were talking about them. All the links will also go in a follow-up email, so you also don't have to worry about getting too into the nitty-gritty, because people will have access to all of your stories and the reporting after the fact. Which also reminds me the session is being recorded. So we'll be setting that in a follow-up in a few days once the video goes through post-production. It's also captioned for people. So either way, Steve will have about 6 minutes with each of you. And then after that point in time, we're going to go to an open audience Q&A. So the way that'll look like, because it's a donor event and we want to try to have as much control over it as possible, we did select questions from the audience submitted questions that they're able to add into the event registration. So I do have a list of those. Robin will be directing them. It's mostly going to be for the reporters, and then some will be for Steve specifically if it's kind of bigger picture, editorial questions. I didn't provide those to you beforehand, but all of those are going to be fairly easy, to tackle. It's going to be very much focused on like, what was it like engaging with like difficult subjects on your story, right? So, experiences that are going to be very personal to your reporting. And just, I encourage you all to chime in. Let's try to reduce the cricket awkward silences as much as possible. Just jump in, don't be shy, and don't be polite either, waiting on someone else to go first. Just jump in on those. So we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for that portion. We may end up taking some questions that come in live through the chat, but most of the focus is going to be on those questions that were submitted beforehand. And then after that, Robin will just do some brief closing remarks, and that'll be the end of our session. It's going to go quickly. It's going to be, short and sweet, you'll find. If you also see questions come in either through the chat or through the Q&A that are specific to your story, and you're kind of done talking and Steve has moved on to the next person, feel free to respond to those. You can respond to those either via chat, or you can do the Q&A box that's below, and just respond, in that like Q&A submitted question. You have full reign to do that if it's specific to your story. But otherwise, that's, kind of the run of it from start to finish. I will have the chat enabled for this program. Usually we don't do that for our events just because, we have such a mixed crowd and a lot of our issues are hot button issues and we want to try to keep it productive. But for this group, I'm hoping people will be on better behavior. So I, obviously have full control over moderating that, and I will be moderating that as people submit their, questions or if people have comments. But yeah, so I'm gonna do a quick audio check. I'll just have everyone say test 1, 2, 3, and then if you have any questions, we'll go ahead and get to those. But Kat, let's start with you.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Cool.
Sound good?
Yeah, great. Jody?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Awesome. Heather?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Awesome. Jane, I know yours is working, but one more time.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Cool. And Jeanette?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Cool. Perla?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Good. Haru?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Steve?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Awesome. Neil?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Cool. And Robin?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Awesome. All right. Any questions from folks? Love it. I love when there's no questions. All right. The only other aside is I will be using the Zoom chat to communicate with everyone. So you'll find that I'll be giving, 5-minute warning. Let's wrap up. This is more specifically for Steve, just to say like, all right, let's move on to the next question. Let's wrap up. But if I find that you are rambling, I will give you a nudge to wrap up out of total love and kindness. So just keep an eye on that. And if you have any questions for me just throughout the entire session, feel free to reach me via that chat. But otherwise, we're going to start with everyone's camera turned off. Jane, yours will be the only one turned on. And then when you are cued, you can turn your camera back on. So everyone except for Jane should have their cameras on now. Captioner, I see you. I am promoting you now. All right, Captioner, you should have the ability to do that now. All right, it's going to be a great session. Thank you all so much for being here. I know that it's a crazy time of the year and it's a huge ask, for you all to participate during this time. So we do really appreciate it. I know that this is huge for development and for our donors. So just thank you so much for being here. And if you have any questions, I will be here. Jane, I'm gonna go ahead and turn my camera off now. Actually, I'll stay on with you so you're not the only one awkwardly on camera, at least up until a minute before.
No worries. Actually, a question just came to mind. Is there a time, like, do we want to start right at 2:02 or I'm sorry,
so I'll be
4:04?
Yeah, I'll be
Okay.
starting.
No, but I mean, for me to hand it over to Robin, when does that?
Oh yeah, no. So just start reading straight through.
Okay.
More often than not, those remarks end up flying by way quicker. But the reason we kind of chunk in that extra time is just to give us more of a window if needed.
Got it. Okay. Perfect.
We're flowing straight through that.
Okay.
Can you say again when you want our cameras on and off?
Yeah, you'll have a very clear vocal cue. So Steve, will cue you, each individually to say, all right, now we're going to be talking to Haru. Now we're going to be talking to Jody, so once Steve cues you, you can go ahead and turn your camera on.
And do you want me to turn my camera off when I'm done speaking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Confirming.
Yeah. And if you forget, I will turn it off for you. Yeah, so everyone will have very clear vocal cues. And then Jane, you'll find that I also just made you a co-host. I usually just like to have 3 hosts in case mine fails and the other person fails. And if the last one fails, then it's just ordained by God and it's not meant to happen. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself. Jane, I'm gonna give you a cue via the chat when to go, just to start your script. So I'll literally just say start.
Okay.
There's a little lag between when I click go live. So I'll just cue you there, but I'm going to turn my camera off now.
Great.
All right, Jane, you can start.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Jane Nicholson and I am the Director of Leadership Gifts here at ProPublica. I'm just here to say hello and welcome you while we wait for a few more folks to join us, and then we'll get started in just a couple moments. Today, you're going to be hearing from ProPublica's editors and reporters on a few of our investigations that spurred real-world impact this year. They'll discuss what sparked the stories, more about what it was like to report on them, and more about the changes that came to be. And then after that, we will answer some questions from the audience. We've already gathered quite a few really great questions from many of you. But if a question comes to mind during the event, please feel free to submit it using the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. I should note that this event is being recorded, and so tomorrow we will be sending an email with a link to the video, and that will be emailed to everybody who registered for this event. So it looks like we've got enough people on the call. And if you're just joining us, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Jane Nicholson, and I am the Director of Leadership Gifts here at ProPublica. We are just thrilled for you to be here with us for this event, and we are so grateful for your support. And without further ado, I would like to hand this over to our President and Co-CEO, Robin Sparkman.
Hi, Jane. Thanks so much. And it's so nice to see everybody here tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for believing in our mission and for understanding how important investigative journalism is to a democratic society. We really enjoy bringing our friends and our supporters together to talk about our work and to meet the reporters behind some of our stories. It's going to be a very fun hour ahead of us. So now I'm going to turn things over to our MC tonight, my co-CEO and our editor-in-chief, Steve Engelberg. Steve?
Hold on one second here. Good afternoon. Hold on, sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. One of the things that's most fun about my job at ProPublica is having the pleasure of helping to bring into the world some really truly amazing pieces of journalism and things that took enormous amounts of ingenuity. And so I want to jump right into it because we're going to talk about some of the most ingenious stories of the year. And the story we're going to start with is Price Kids Pay by Jody Cohen. So hi, Jody.
Hi, thank you for having me on today. Thanks everyone for coming to listen.
So tell us a little bit about how this story came to be, and what it was about, because this is, I think, an unusually complicated effort. This was not a story that was lying in plain sight.
The story came about because we've written about school discipline in the past, different issues related to students in school and discipline. And in prior reporting, we had noticed that students, you would see in different reports that police were called in to address student behavior. And we started this story, we did this project along with the Chicago Tribune, and we started it with the question of what happens when police get involved in kind of routine discipline, not the type of stories you see, on TV or something, the most extreme examples of, an arrest of a young child, but really what happens day to day. And we sent lots of public records requests. In the end, we sent over 500 requests to schools and eventually to police departments to see what happens when police get involved. And right away, we started getting information back from schools that showed that police were issuing students tickets, like a ticket for violating a local ordinance, tickets for possessing tobacco, like a vape pen, or disorderly conduct, or a fight in the hallway. And we, the records were inconsistent because the federal government requires schools to keep lots of data, but not specific data about police ticketing in schools. And we wanted to really find out how often this happens, and what students are getting tickets for, and what the consequences and the harm is. And that led us down various paths, but in the end, we were able, through lots and lots of interviews and going to all kinds of hearings that are held in police stations and city council rooms with kind of hearing officers. They act like judges, but they're not really judges. We were able to document over 12,000 tickets at school districts all across Illinois, affecting students in ways where they, some of these tickets would be up to $750. They had no right to counsel because these were not in juvenile court. They often were sent into debt collection. Students were young people, as young as 12, were being, forced to sign documents saying that they were going to pay, or their house was going to, a lien was going to be put on their house, their wages, and they were going to lose their house. All kinds of consequences for these kids for behavior that really would have been handled before in the principal's office. And this was an example
Right.
of outsourcing to police. So.
And what happened when your first story appeared, revealing that teenagers, school kids were being fined for these kinds of things, or facing potentially sort of life-altering finds. What happened?
So the first story published in April. We've done a bunch of stories since, but that night, this superintendent, the Illinois school superintendent, who oversees all the schools in Illinois, sent an email letter to all school leaders, superintendents, principals, saying, I implore you to stop this practice now. Cut it out. You're abdicating your responsibility to police. You're hurting families. These tickets are a difference between, a food on the table at night and not. So the letter is up on the screen now. And you can see she really was saying, cut this out. Like, don't do this. Do not tell police to ticket students at your school, because that's what was happening. The school administrators, the deans of students, were finding out a student had a vape pen, for example, and telling the school police officer who was already in the building, and then the police officer was writing a ticket. In Illinois, it's against the law to fine a student as discipline. So they had found this other way, which was to go to the police and have the police issue a costly ticket or a fine to the students.
Did schools pay attention to this letter?
Oh, they did. Some of them we know did. The superintendent of the second largest district in the state, the district outside Chicago, he did not realize the extent that this was happening. He actually didn't realize it was happening in his schools, and he has said to stop it. Other schools have stopped. Another school we wrote about in a follow-up story, they have stopped involving the police in discipline. So I don't know that every school has, but definitely there have been some that have definitely listened and have stopped the practice.
Very quickly, and I'm sure we'll come back to this theme because I think it sort of runs through all of these stories. You sort of casually mentioned 500 public records requests. Just share a little bit about what it means to do that. How do you track all those things? What do you do? How does this work?
It's complicated, right? We have big spreadsheets where we track the requests that we've sent, whether we've gotten them back. It's lots of follow-ups. And what you can see on the screen right now is, because this is not something that schools are necessarily, they are not required to track ticketing. We really had to go to the police departments to get the most definitive answers. So a lot of those FOIA requests went to the police departments that have jurisdiction over the schools, and records came back in all kinds of ways. So you can see on the right, there is this ticket where the principal is listed as the complainant, and this was a girl at a junior high school who was, possessing tobacco, or this was a vaping product. And then you see on the left a very different format, which listed, in a spreadsheet what the charge was and what the amount was. And so we took all these different types of this information, which we were getting in all kinds of ways, and made it uniform in a database. So, we could track how often truancy was the offense and how much the fines were. So we could really get a big picture and write with authority. It wasn't, the story wasn't about a one-off school district doing this. We were able to really show how often this was happening across the entire state, and why, and the harm, and the finances, and really everything.
Well, thank you, Jody. Because this is a lightning experience, we're going to move on to the next story, but I'm sure there'll be questions about that. I'd like to introduce our reporter, Ann-Jeanette Damon. Hello, Ann-Jeanette, I hope.
Hello, thanks for having me.
There you are. So yeah, we're moving from school children to a thing with broader applications. So talk a little bit about how your story about this COVID testing company came to light. And we should say that they had a pretty low percentage of success in their tests.
Yeah, if you saw the headline, it was the company that missed 96% of COVID cases. And this came to light. There was, when the pandemic began, testing ran pretty smoothly in this community in Northern Nevada. You went to the health district, or you went to the drugstore. Sometimes you might have to wait a while, but things went relatively smoothly. Then Omicron hit, and things just went to absolute chaos. There was a very public display of mayhem around testing sites, people that weren't getting results back or getting weird results back. And the thing that had changed was that there was one company, one lab that was based in Chicago, that had come in and amassed a bunch of different contracts with local governments to provide COVID testing. So at the school district, student athletes who needed to be regularly tested were getting tested by this company. The university, who was trying to keep dorms open and trying to reinstate in-person learning, were trying to regularly test students. The county signed a contract with them to provide community testing. And I thought, you know, what is going on here? What's wrong with this Chicago-based lab that we're suddenly seeing all of these problems? So I put in, and it was on the news and there were some local stories about it. But I wanted to find out like what was going on. The university killed its contract with them, wouldn't say why, refused to comment on it. So I put in some records requests to the health district, the county, the university, the school district, the state. And very quickly, and one of maybe the best, most successful records requests that I've had in my career, we were able to piece together not only how this company had pulled kind of political strings and used influence of the governor's office to fast track its license, but how their tests just did not work. There was, like I said, that public display of kind of chaos, but we didn't really know at the time. There were indications that there was something wrong with the results. People were complaining about it. But what we did not know was that the doctor at the university had started to do this kind of behind the scenes scientific tests where she would send the same samples to Chicago and that same sample to the Nevada Public Health Lab, and found out, as I said at the beginning, that 96% of the results were false negatives that Chicago was giving to Nevadans, sending sick people back out into the community.
So what was the reaction to all of this? Did everyone just shrug their shoulders, or what happened next?
There was some shrugging of shoulders. Some people that I think wish that the story would just kind of go away. I think the most immediate impact that we had was that there was an investigator, a federal investigator in Chicago, who apparently had North Shore Clinical on his radar screen for a while, sent an email asking for documents from Nevada. So essentially, our work helped expand the federal investigation into this company's activities to Nevada, which was pretty good. And then, so this story published in the spring, and it ended up being an election year, which, to be quite honest, wasn't really on my radar screen when we wrote this story. But the governor's race ended up being quite a contested, close race. And the story kind of took center stage in that whole debate. It was brought up in the actual candidate debate, and the sitting governor's opponents spent millions of dollars on television, radio, social media ads, really just hammering the governor of Nevada for his handling of this issue.
Yeah, and looking at the screen, I think I have a hunch why. Could you tell us a little bit about those emails?
Yeah, like I said, this was one of the most successful records requests that I had put out there. Each batch of emails I got back, my eyes would pop at what was happening. You got a sense of kind of the distress and stress of the like ground level scientist government staff who were doing their best to try and stop this. And then you also got the staff that was like, look, this is clearly political influence peddling here. And so on the screen now is an email from the lead inspector, health facilities inspector for the state of Nevada. And he was under pressure from his boss, who was under pressure from the COVID chief, who was under pressure from the governor's chief of staff to speed up this license application from North Shore's Nevada guys on the ground in Nevada who were family friends with the governor. And so you see Bradley Waples here just like saying in black and white, look, a previous director, this lobbyist that was hired by the lab, is here influencing and pressuring us to move this license forward. And it's really frustrating for staff who are trying to churn through these, legitimate lab applications, and we have to put those on hold and go jump onto this application because they're connected to the governor.
Yeah, and I see we have one more little email here. If you could just explicate this one as well, since it seems like the person who is writing feels not very happy about the hiring of this lab.
Yeah, so Heather Kerwin is the lead epidemiologist in Washoe County, which is the second largest county in Nevada, where Reno is located. And she was, I would say one of the heroes of the epidemic. She was someone who worked very, very hard throughout this entire pandemic. And she was on the ground, a scientist and expert in the field, who was seeing these results come back from this laboratory and knew that there were problems. The rapid test was saying one thing and the PCR test was saying another thing. Parents were at loose ends. There was just, chaos. And she was trying to alert county managers not to expand their business with this company. And she said, please don't do this. And the county manager ignored those pleas, signed the contract anyways. And this is her reaction to that expansion of business. And she says to her boss, look, why did this go through without a discussion of the discordant results? This is going to cause absolute mayhem. And in this kind of sad womp response, her boss says, I tried, no one listens to me. And she ended up being right. There was mayhem.
All right, well, to be continued. We're going to go to our next interesting tale. We go from the world of healthcare to the world that many people are involved in, which is the price of renting an apartment. And we'll have Heather Vogel and Haru Karin talk a little bit about their research on that. And I should say this is research in an area we at ProPublica love. If you show us a complicated black box algorithm, we just love to investigate it. So I'd love to hear a bit more about how you guys did that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks everybody for coming and thanks for wanting to talk about our story, which we're very excited about. So there's kind of a little bit of a winding road to how we got to this story. It really started under the Trump administration. I think I would say that, I spent some time at that time looking at some of the people who were prominent politically at the time. And there was a lot of people who were connected to real estate lobby, and in particular, people who were involved in owning or managing rental apartments became prominent during that era. And I spent some time kind of looking at what they were up to. After that, I also became aware that really there was this issue nationally, and in some markets it was very severe, where rents were really soaring and creating huge problems for families in terms of cost burdening. And there was a lot of concerns that there were these corporate landlords that were partly to blame for this. So I started by basically digging into what the role of some of these corporate landlords was, and in particular looking at the role of firms that were backed by private equity. And I found that they had really expanded their presence in the rental market. And in looking at that role of private equity and the impact on tenants of their involvement, that's when I came upon a tip that a lot of the biggest landlords, including a lot of the ones that were backed by private equity, were using the same software to set rents, and that they had a very large presence in some markets, and that there were some questions about this software and whether the algorithm was potentially violating antitrust laws. And so we really dug into that using data and interviews, and just doing our best to explore that and look at hundreds of documents we pulled off the company's website, trying to understand how the software worked, talking to the developers, things like that. And we were basically able to write the story that, there are some concerns that potentially some of the biggest landlords in the country are using this software to price fix. I don't know if Haru wants to jump in or.
No, I think you nailed it.
Tell us a little bit about sort of, since I assume we don't really fully understand the algorithm behind all this, what makes you think it's likely or plausible that consumers are ending up paying a higher rent as a result of the companies using this? What sort of drives you to that conclusion?
Well, legal experts we talked to had a few very specific concerns looking at the way the software works, because it is a little different from some of the other pricing softwares that are out there even for apartment rents. And in particular, the software not only considers, you have an apartment that's being priced. So it looks at that apartment, it looks at square footage, number of bedrooms, probably factors like that. Might look at the property and some property specific factors. But what it also does is it pulls in data from other apartment buildings in the area who are competitors potentially. So it looks at the near proximity, what are the competitors charging? And it looks not just at like the data you can get off apartments.com when you're doing your apartment search and you're like, okay, what's everybody asking? But it pulls like the actual rents that competitors are able to obtain in very close proximity to the apartment that's being priced. So it'll factor in concessions or anything, all kinds of stuff that's not in the public view that people don't have a sense of, necessarily what the final agreement that tenants are reaching with their landlords. Well, all that secret data is sucked into this algorithm and is used to set the prices in real time, they claim, for, the available units that are using the pricing software. And the way that was operating was one big concern, the use of the private data. There was also concern because this company had created a forum where these competitors could get together and discuss pricing and the pricing software and how it worked and how to improve it. They were coming together in private invitation-only meetings once a year at a conference, also doing quarterly conference calls. And there were sort of a lot of opportunities where legal experts said the type of, collusion potentially could occur. So that was another thing.
Well, that brings us to a question of impact. So we published all this and more. What happened?
Well, we published in mid-October, and since then there have been 13 class action lawsuits alleging violations of antitrust law filed in multiple states around the country. There were 4 letters by groups of congressional lawmakers in both the Senate and the House, urging the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission to investigate this software. And then we just reported, I think it was right before Thanksgiving, that the Department of Justice had opened an investigation into the software and into the company and these questions about antitrust violations potentially.
Well, we'll certainly be covering that in the coming months and year. I want to move us quickly to the Texas border and our colleague Perla Treviso, who is going to, in 6 minutes, explain to us the politics of immigration in Texas. Right, Perla?
2 years later, we're still mute. I said easily done.
So tell us a little bit about this. Billions on the border. What was it about? How did you get onto it? And what did you find?
So in 2020, Governor Greg Abbott here in Texas announced a new operation. So it was about 2 months into Biden's administration. And his claim was that because the federal government had failed to secure the border, Texas needed to step in and do it for them. And the problem was that this had been the same words that Abbott and his predecessor had been using for nearly 2 decades in asking Texas lawmakers for money to secure the border. And they had never really proven how successful they had been. So they start holding press conferences touting, X number of immigrants arrested and all these criminals being taken off the streets and all this drugs seized. So, we had a very simple question what is the data behind those numbers? It turned out that it was a much more difficult question to answer. They kept giving us the runaround. My colleague, Lemmy Creel, and I had been covering border for a while. And I don't think we've dealt with harder agencies than the Department of Public Safety and the governor's office. They gave us data that was incorrect, that was incomplete. We try to, we would get updates to the data that we couldn't match. The numbers that we were getting were not matching what they were calling or announcing in press conferences. So ultimately, with the help of a data reporter with the Marshall Project, we found out that the numbers were not matching because they were including things outside of the regions where they said they were holding the operation. They were including, for instance, the case of a Black man 250 miles from here who had been arrested on a domestic family incident. And they were including that as part of the success of Operation Lone Star.
Wow. Now, how much money have they spent on this so far?
So far, it's been more than $4 billion. Every time, it's way more than lawmakers have allocated for the effort. And for the first time, a lot more of this money is going to the governor's office, which experts have told us is problematic for many reasons. And it was right before the midterm elections. And so it raises, in a lot of people's eyes, it raises a lot of questions.
So talk a little bit about these slides we have in front of us. Both seem quite relevant to the conversation.
Yeah, so I'll start with the funding because we were just talking about that. So I think in this graph, you can really see how what Texas is spending on border security had just simply skyrocketed in this past legislative session. And these numbers do not take into account what Abbott has basically done. He's tapped into other agencies without the need of going to the whole legislature and continue to transfer more money for the operation, because he wanted to deploy up to 10,000 National Guard members. And it is a costly, as you can imagine, it's a costly endeavor. So they were running out of money. And you had the National Guard, the Texas Military Department coming back to the Guard's office saying, like, we're running out of money, like, if you want us to keep going. And so he was tapping into it. So you see a big increase in border security. Texas is the state that spends by far the most on so-called border security efforts in the country. And that was even before this big increase that we're seeing. The other slide, something that Abbott did, he declared a disaster. He said that because we have so many people coming across, it's a disaster. And in Texas, you have to renew the disaster declaration every 30 months. And so what we start seeing, first, all the counties that you see in red are the major border counties. And they're like, we're not going to participate in this. We have issues along the border, but it is not a disaster. And we're not going to be part of this. So then Abbott starts every month adding more and more counties that, as you see, some are nowhere from the border. And they tend to be, by and large, more conservative counties where he can, they're claiming there's a disaster because of the border, and that lets, more resources free up, that lets Abbott give them grants directly. And that goes back to our slide from the right, that ties it to the money going into the governor's office that they can then directly control and distribute across the state.
So, Perla, an obvious question that sort of emerges from all of this and some of the press coverage we've seen nationally, what is really happening at the border? Is there a crisis? Is Texas in some way justified to take these steps given what's happening? Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely, people, I'm from El Paso myself, and I think my family included would tell you that there's an increase in migration and there's an impact on border communities. I think the biggest question that lawmakers, some of them are making, some of them are not raising, is that what is the state roles in this issue, in this problem, however we want to call it, and is pouring $4 billion from taxpayers' money, in a state that has the largest number of uninsured, has issues around education. Is this the best way to spend it? And how do we measure success? As I mentioned at the beginning, they've been talking about this for 20 years, and that's something else we did in this project. And yet we keep finding ourselves as Texas residents, as the conversation seems to be the same. And so I think the question is what Abbott doing effective, and how do you measure success when the numbers that you're relying on are flawed to begin with?
I do have to ask you, I was looking at that map. So one of those counties is on the Oklahoma border. What do they do with their emergency support money? What possible use could it be?
I mean, I think it's twofold, right? I think this became, as we know, immigration is a very political subject. So I think with Operation Lone Star, it has been as much political as practical. I don't know if that would be the word. So, I think we're going to continue looking into this. Part of it is to follow the grants that the state is making to these communities. But I think for a lot of these counties, it was partly sending a message and showing Abbott that he had their support. And again, this was all happening leading up to Abbott running for his third term as governor of Texas, he's going on being the longest serving term after Perry. So I think for a lot of these places, it became also a sign of support for the governor of Texas.
And just to close here, in case people don't follow Texas politics as closely as you and I, how'd the governor do in his reelection?
He did very well. I think, border security in this poll after poll shows that particularly for Republican voters continues to be a major drive. There were a lot of, political experts, analysts, professors that we talked to that saw this as Abbott playing politics with border security. It was just a very expensive initiative to take on. But I think for particularly a conservative politician here in Texas, pouring billions of dollars on the border is definitely a good thing.
Well, thanks, Perla. All right, we're going to go to our last stories, and then we'll take some questions. Kathleen McGrory and Neil Betty, on a subject, I should say, that has been written about before, and this reporting is one of the great proofs that as much has been written on anything, there's still more to be said. And that subject is the dangers and sort of large-scale American indifference for many, many decades to asbestos. So Kit and Neil, come on here, and let's see what we got.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, Neil. So how did you get into this story in the first place? What brought you to asbestos as a subject matter?
Yeah, so I think this started at the end of last year. I had this random curiosity. I wanted to know, what is the worst thing that America still hasn't banned, but has been long banned in other countries, other places? And as I did some research, the thing that kept popping up was asbestos. We haven't fully banned asbestos from the United States. That surprised me. It surprised Kat when I told her. And it turns out that 2 chlorine companies have been importing hundreds of tons of raw asbestos into the US from countries like Brazil and Russia for years, and they use it to produce chlorine at a few aging plants around the country. As someone who has grown up with mesothelioma ads, I was surprised that is happening. I was surprised that it hasn't been banned. It turns out that the chemical industry has long fought against a full ban from their uses by saying for decades that their workers were well protected by their strict safety measures and their strong workplace safety regulations. And so that immediately got me curious, and I wanted to know more, and I wanted to know if they were telling the truth. So I told Kat about it, and I'll let Kat talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a really smart moment for us to look at that, because the EPA actually earlier this year announced that it was going to try to ban asbestos. It put forward a proposal to ban asbestos. It had reached its own conclusion that the workers in these chlorine plants were at unreasonable risk. But what we saw, in response to that proposal was that these chlorine companies came fighting, and, they were determined to beat back this ban and to continue using this material, which is a known carcinogen. We know how dangerous this is, right? And they made this argument that we use it safely, we use it safely, we use it safely. So we figured that we, as independent journalists, had a role to play here, and we could look and see, do they actually use it safely? We could test that by talking to folks on the ground.
And what did you find?
I can jump in there. We were able to connect with folks who had worked at a plant in Niagara Falls, New York. It was really difficult to connect with plant workers at many of these plants for a number of reasons. One, there's a very small universe of plants and plant workers. But oftentimes these are people who fear if they speak up, if they speak out, they will lose their jobs. They may or may not have union protection. They may not fully understand the consequences of asbestos exposure. But we were able to talk to some guys at a plant up in Niagara Falls that had closed. It closed at the end of 2021. And what they told us was just absolutely stunning. That, in the area of the plant, one specific area of the plant where they did maintenance, they said there was just asbestos everywhere. They said it was stuck to the walls. It was rolled across the floor like tiny tumbleweeds. It was stuck to beams. It was caked on top of beams. You could see it hanging in the air when you walked through that building. And there were certain instances where the workers would go in and out of that building. It's the one that's in the illustration here has kind of that golden top. There were some tasks that workers would go into that building for wearing full PPE, right? But there were other tasks that they went into that building and they were not wearing any type of a mask or a respirator or any type of a protective gear whatsoever. And they believe that for decades, they were breathing it in.
Let's talk both of you, if you could, a little bit about the regulatory climate here, because the dangers of asbestos are pretty well understood and documented at this point. It's obvious why Europe would ban it in these functions. Why is America different? What's the difference here?
We've been looking into that, and one of the main things is that our chemical regulatory system seems to be lagging behind most of the world. Asbestos, there was an attempt to ban it in 1989. We were going to be one of the first countries to ban it back then. The EPA proposed this ban, but the companies that use and profit off of asbestos quickly sued the government, and the EPA lost in court, and the ban was overturned. And from talking to former and current EPA officials, it seems like that loss in court really shook things up. And internally, EPA officials believe they couldn't ban another chemical again with the way the system worked, with the way the law worked. So for 30 years, the EPA didn't try to ban another dangerous chemical, including asbestos. Then in 2016, the law was updated to try to fix this. And that is why we're now seeing a proposed ban. But at the same time, it seems like there are things holding it back. This proposed ban was due a couple of years ago, but it's only starting to come into works now. And we're seeing this resistance from industry. We're seeing the EPA having to answer to that resistance. And the agency told us that this proposed ban likely won't be finalized till the end of next year.
So, Kat, do you think it'll happen?
That's a really good question. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, there certainly is momentum within the EPA to try to get this done. Folks within the EPA want to see this happen. But there is a real risk of these industry groups of industry filing a lawsuit and, letting the courts decide. So what we're seeing kind of in parallel is another effort by folks in Congress to actually pass a law that would ban asbestos, which they believe would be harder for opponents to overturn in court. That is something that lawmakers have tried to do on a couple of occasions now. They have gotten very close to the finish line. They have never reached it. And they've actually been holding up our stories, folks who support this congressional route, and saying, look, this is the reason why we need to do this now. And they say that is kind of helping them build the momentum they might need to pass legislation.
Fascinating. Well, I think I'd like to thank you both for explaining that. And I think we're ready to go to questions from our audience.
Great. Just before we get to the Q&A portion of our program, we want to share a link to our event survey in the chat box. We appreciate your feedback. Please take a second to fill that out. And so I have some questions that were submitted in advance, and you're also all welcome to use the Q&A box and submit some questions, and we'll try to get to them as well. I have my first question here. And I'm wondering if one of the reporters, you can just volunteer yourself, if you can talk about the process of pitching your story to your editor, your story that you spoke about, and the give and take that was involved there. Does anybody want to volunteer themselves? Or I'll just call on you.
I can.
Go ahead, Heather.
No, go ahead, Jody.
You can take both.
Well, we can both chat about it. So we have a lengthy pitch process at ProPublica, or not necessarily lengthy, but we really have to show why it's worth devoting the time and money and everything to doing this story. Answer, some key questions. Why this? Why now? To think about impact, and just really, we don't just go and pursue long-term stories on a whim or on a flyer of an idea. Like we really have enough that we can prove up to our editors of why it's worth the time and investment to pursue this particular story.
Heather?
Yeah, sure. This was a story, our story we'd started talking about months ago, and I was working on a few other stories also, and so kind of got through those. But before we really focused full time on this story, we went through this process, which I actually found really, really helpful for me, which was to write a really, really, really long memo that is probably really boring when compared to like the way we write finally, which is much more succinct, believe it or not. Like this memo was like, if you were trying to go to sleep, maybe like it would be helpful because it was just so long and just way too much stuff in it. Stuff from here, stuff from there, kind of trying to pull and synthesize everything together and figure out, where are the biggest gaps in our reporting and what would it take to close those gaps and to try to, understand what questions are outstanding, what are the assumptions that we're making, and maybe what do we need to do to make sure that those assumptions are correct and make sure that we're not going in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm. Great. So behind each of you is a whole other team of people at ProPublica helping you with your stories. And that includes lawyers, it includes quantitative journalists and visual journalists, and editors. And so I would love to like tease that out a little bit. Maybe we can start with Heather and Haru. Can you just tell a little bit about the data journalism part of Heather's story, and Haru, your role in that?
Sure. So, as a data reporter, I tend to collaborate with a lot of other journalists who are the ones who typically like originate the story concept. So as Heather said, she was the one who wrote this memo and kind of first got the tip that this was something we should look into. I actually came in sort of halfway through the project. We had another data reporter, Ryan Little, who's now at the Baltimore Banner, who, after talking things out with Heather, hatched a plan to basically start scraping the websites of some of these large property management companies that use the technology that we write about in the story. And the basic concept there was that we would be able to watch their price movements from day to day and try to see if there was anything interesting we could find there. And that was sort of just one. I think that's a pretty typical example of how an analysis tends to work out, or how like a member of the data team tends to be brought into a project, is that usually there's a tip that kind of comes in, and after a bit of like fleshing that out and pre-reporting, a member of my team is usually brought in to kind of help answer the question of like, can we measure this, and is there some way that we can take this anecdote and scale it up, basically. And that's more or less what happened here.
Great. And Jody, can you tell us how you worked with the lawyers here at ProPublica?
The lawyers are amazing at ProPublica. There was one day when I was at a hearing where these are hearings, we don't have municipal courts in Illinois, so these are the hearings I was talking about in police stations and in government buildings, and they aren't used to reporters coming. I don't know that reporters have ever shown up at these hearings, and there was one hearing officer, it's happened a couple times, where they tried to throw us out, but these are public hearings. And one of the ProPublica lawyers, got on the phone with me right away, researched the law very quickly in Illinois, sent me, actually, I stayed on the phone with him. He read what I should write down. I took out my notebooks, dictated what he was saying, went back, went to the police officer, this was at a police station, got the note to the hearing officer, and he, eventually let me back in because he was just totally wrong about the law, but being able to write down the name of the lawyer that he could call and have the lawyer so quickly tell me exactly what to write to hand to the hearing officer was, invaluable. And it happened a couple times. So that was the, one example.
Great. So collaboration is a huge part of everything that happens here. Neil and Kat, can you talk a little bit about how you work together? You collaborate on your stories. How do you divvy up the work?
Good question. Kat and I have been long-time reporting partners. How many years now? I think 5 years. We used to work together at the Tampa Bay Times, and we have reunited here at ProPublica. So we have a process that we've developed over time. We're both reporters. We both have separate skills. I have a background in data analysis. So usually if a story has those needs, I will jump in there. But at the same time, we tend to do trips together. We report together. We knock on doors together. Kat, what am I missing?
No, it works out. I mean, I feel very fortunate to have a partner in these endeavors, right? Because we've got to think through these stories. We've got to make sure that we have left no stone unturned. We have to test our theories and then test them again. And it is hugely helpful to have a brilliant partner alongside of me who is helping make sure that we have done that work and we have reported in such a rigorous fashion that our findings will be unassailable.
Great. This is for Perla. We have a question about our relationship with the Texas Tribune. Can you talk about that partnership and what do you get from your Texas Tribune colleagues? How does that help inform your reporting?
Yeah, so the way our team works, which is a little bit different than other regional offices at ProPublica, we are a collaboration with the Texas Tribune. So all of the work automatically has to be published at both ProPublica and the Texas Tribune. And I think that has been extremely valuable for both organizations. I get to work with colleagues who are covering the legislature, every 2 years, who have amazing sources and background. We have skills and time. And I think that coming together is what made this project especially successful. The DOJ launched an investigation. I think even though there had been other border operations before, it's because we were working together and kind of pounding at this issue from all the different angles that really made a difference. So I think it has made, both of our jobs a lot easier. I think we have a wider impact, which I think it's very important what we do in a much wider reach.
Great, thank you. So we have a question about pre-reporting. What is it and what's the thinking involved? And I'm going to ask Anjanette to answer this one because I'm sure there was a lot of pre-reporting involved, just guessing, for your COVID story. Can you talk about what was involved there?
Yeah, this one came together. It was kind of slow motion at first, but then it really picked up steam. And I actually didn't go through the big memo process on this particular story. I just kind of on my own put out the records requests. And as the records were coming back, I was like, oh yeah, no, I think there's a story here. And so that's when I brought it up with my editor and we had conversations about what more to dig into and whether it was something to dedicate my time to. So the pre-reporting, a lot of it was just getting those records requests back on this particular story. Other stories, we're talking to sources all the time. I'm a big records request person, so I'm constantly putting out different records requests and seeing what's coming back. But to really develop those memos, yeah, there's talking to sources, there's getting the tips, there's vetting those tips, there's talking to other sources about what the first source will tell you, and then trying to get records to back up what human sources might tell you, all to synthesize into one of those very wordy memos.
Mm-hmm. And just a little more on that, Anjanette. What do you mean by records request for people who don't do this all day? Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, luckily I work in Nevada, which has a very strong public records law, which basically says that any document, record, correspondence that's created by the government, a staff member, an elected official, the public has a right to see. And so it's not quite as easy as just walking into the city hall or the governor's office and saying, let me see all your emails. We craft a document that we send to the appropriate government agency that's the keeper of those those documents that says under NRS 289, if I'm remembering it correctly, I am asking to see documents related to, in this case, I asked for all correspondence involving the lab North Shore Clinical. So I want to see all of the emails from, I tried to narrow it, so I picked the people in the government that I knew were involved in this project. So I want to see all the emails between Dave Solero, the county manager, and North Shore Clinical. And then they have, under state law, a certain amount of time to respond to that. Sometimes we have to negotiate on how much money they want to charge us for it. Sometimes the government agency will say, oh no, we think that these records fall under this exemption. We're not going to give them to you. And that creates, sometimes we just lose and they're right, there is an exemption. We don't get to see that record. Or we'll go back and forth. We get our wonderful legal team involved and have back and forth with the government agency to try and pry those loose under the open records law.
Great, thank you. I have a question for Steve. So we have a question here about partnering with other media organizations to get our stories out. And do you want to talk about the thinking that goes into deciding who we're going to partner with for these stories?
Sure. Partnership has really been core to ProPublica from its founding. That was both a necessity, because you start an organization, you have very little sort of web traffic, but also a way, even as we grew our traffic, to continuing to reach the people most affected by stories. As an example, just recently, we did a piece about prosecutions of people for purported illegal voting in Florida. We got that into 18 Florida newspapers, as well as, of course, on our website. That very much enhances the chances that someone's going to see the story and that it's going to have the effect that we want. We have all kinds of partnerships at ProPublica. Sometimes they're with text-based organizations like Florida newspapers, but they're also with podcasts, NPR. We've done 12 or so documentaries with Frontline. So, the idea would be, when can we get a story out in a way that reaches people who otherwise might not have seen it, potentially in ways that are sort of journalistically complementary to what we're our core business, which is writing stories on text. And so we think about all those different levels in a partnership.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question for anybody who wants to answer this, which is, you all work on these stories one at a time for a long time. And, how do you keep going day after day, focusing on one story? What keeps you motivated every single day to focus on that?
I guess
Harassing
I can
FOIA
start.
officers.
What? Yeah. Harassing FOIA officers. Yeah. Perla?
I was gonna say, I think also like a big part that you learn here is how important organization is, because you are juggling all these things and you are learning, like for every story, you're learning about an entirely new topic. I'm sure like the asbestos team, they had to learn all about asbestos and chemical, in our case, about border operations going back 20 years. So I think like being organized and every time you get something back, it's super exciting. As you said, like you pester someone, all of a sudden you get the data that you would be requesting, and just having that excitement, talking it over with your editor, and that person also gets excited, and knowing that you are moving towards something that can possibly bring about change or that can help better inform people. I think it's something that you don't need much more motivation than that.
I agree. I mean, it might sound cheesy, but I think the mission drives us. I mean, we're reporting on things that we know are wrong, and we believe that the work we're doing can make it better for people. We write about really vulnerable people who are ignored. I mean, I think we've all been in places where we meet somebody who's affected by what we're writing about, and they say, we have just been praying that someone would come help us, or that they would, someone would listen to us. And I think meeting the people who are not being heard, who people in power are not, listening to and not doing anything to help, is what keeps me going.
Great. So we have a bit of an unfair question, but I'm going to ask this anyway, which is to sort of look into the crystal ball of 2023 and just, no one is going to hold you responsible for this, but is there something that you look into 23 and you think, oh, very broadly speaking, might be worth, a few calls looking into, something that seems interesting to you? Anything you want to throw out there?
I'll jump on this one. We do, my reporting partner and I, with the ProPublica's engagement team, we're looking at if you've been driving down the street, or maybe you own a house and you start getting text messages or flyers, or you see the little yellow bandit signs, we buy houses. We're looking into who the companies that are behind those efforts to get you to sell your home. So we do have a request for help out there. So if anybody has any information they'd like to share, you can fill out our form. I can hunt down the link and put it in the chat. So if you have any information on that you want to share that would be helpful, that would be great. We'd love to hear it.
That's great. Great. And we have a question about your backgrounds and how you got into the work that you're doing. And I'll just ask for one or two people just for time. Just, people out there, you watch All the President's Men or you watch Spotlight, and it seems like, wow, that's really exciting. And you guys actually do the work in real life all day, every day. Can I just ask for one or two people just to talk very succinctly about how you got into this line of work?
I think we should hear from Neil because he has a really great story.
Okay. Thanks for volunteering.
I'm volunteering, Neil.
Thanks, Kat. So my background is actually in computer science. I went to school, studied computer science, and interned on Wall Street. I was a software developer for investment banks. But I got into journalism because my entire time at school, I needed some sort of escape from my studies, and I joined the student newspaper. And I got really, really into journalism and telling stories and doing that kind of work. So when I graduated and I started my first job in New York for another big bank, I was immediately thinking, how do I leave and get back into journalism? And I ended up finding a job in journalism at a local paper in Florida at the Tampa Bay Times with their investigations team that needed someone with data skills to help them out. And the rest is history.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Kat, for volunteering Neil's excellent story. We appreciate that. And I'm sorry, we have a lot more questions and we don't have the time to do this, but it's been great. I want to thank the reporters and Steve for all of your time and sharing your stories today, your personal stories and your work stories. We really appreciate it. This event has been recorded and you will receive an email from us with the full video of today's program. And we'll also post this recording on our YouTube channel. So from all of us at ProPublica, thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting our work. We really appreciate it. And good night.